Merci beaucoup, Barbara. On m'entend? Voilà. Ça me fait beaucoup de plaisir d'être de retour ici en Suisse, pays pionnier et en politique de la drogue duquel nous avons tous beaucoup à apprendre, et de revoir tant de collègues et d'amis. Merci beaucoup de l'invitation d'être ici. Comme l'ont très bien dit mes compatriotes de l'État de Colorado ce matin, j'aime la Suisse. Et maintenant, je vais m'excuser auprès des bons interprètes suisses au fond de la salle de changer de langue. Ladies and gentlemen, we've heard in the course of this conference, as Barbara just said, that the upcoming special session in the United Nations in 2016 is an important opportunity, and so it is. I'm not sure that the importance lies in changing anything in the UN, including the wording of the final document from the session, but is perhaps rather in using the event to draw in the media and raise public awareness, and in that way perhaps shift the terms and the course of the debate. But I think to succeed even on that level, we need to understand that the rhetoric of the war on drugs is shifting. I hope you can excuse me for focusing my remarks on the role of the United States in particular in shaping this new rhetoric. The US, after all, wrote the book, or maybe we should say the manual on the war on drugs, which, as Fabrice Olivet reminded us so well this morning, we know to have been a race war as much as a drug war. And what I think is happening right now is that the US is helping to write a new chapter in that manual. And it may be useful as we join these debates that are coming up to know what that chapter says. I'm not sure, first of all, that the US has actually ceded its place in the leadership of the global war on drugs. It certainly is true that no one in the US government breathes the term war on drugs anymore. It's absolutely forbidden. Yes, they've left that part of the rhetoric to other countries. I think rather the US is playing a different role right now, and perhaps one that reflects a certain schizophrenia in US government thinking on drugs. It seems clear to me that the President of the United States and the Minister of Justice, whom we call the Attorney General, have one view on drugs and perhaps see a certain interest, particularly on behalf of African American communities who have suffered so badly in this war. They see an interest in sentencing reform and in the liberalization of the harshest drug laws. But many other parts of the government make drug policy in the US, and especially make policy, US foreign policy, in the area of drugs. The Drug Enforcement Administration, the part of the State Department that works on anti-narcotic efforts, and the Department of Defense that we know as the Pentagon. The Pentagon right now is reading the writing on the wall in Latin America, understanding that its military hardware, its surveillance and interdiction operations that have so multiplied and had such an important presence in that region may soon not have a place there, and may soon not have the presence that has contributed to so much violence and havoc in that part of the world. These parts of the government continue to conduct strong advocacy in favor of military and counterintelligence activities in the war on drugs around the world, and they do so partly by claiming a close link between the drug war and the war on terror. Yes, the T word still works magic in the US Congress, even at times of fiscal austerity, as witnessed by the dramatically increasing allocations of US taxpayer money in recent years for the buildup of a US military presence, counter-narcotics and allegedly counter-terrorist presence in West Africa, which is a new front in this losing war. These parts of the government, in various ways, are supporting an anti-reform voice for the lead up to the UN Drug Summit. It's a voice that's coming together very strongly. We're hearing a lot from it already. A lot of the well-funded, mostly US-based or US-supported organizations that used to talk exclusively in terms of drug-free societies now take a different line. They situate their positions often around cannabis legalization, which they, of course, portray as extreme and dangerous. The government itself can't quite say that anymore, can it? But the NGOs that they support in various ways can and do say it in international meetings and elsewhere. You will hear from these US-influenced coalitions slogans like, alternatives, yes, legalization, no. And again, you'll see themselves positioning themselves as the reasonable, moderate, reform-minded alternative between the crazy legalizers on the left and the old-fashioned hardline prohibitionists, which these people sometimes now refer to derisively as the lock-em-up prohibitionists on the right. Alternatives, yes. Legalization, no. If we follow the money, though, behind this slogan, we see that in the US and some of its key international partners anyway, the alternatives in question don't include new investment in community-level services, for example, for which we have mountains of empirical evidence on the benefits. What alternatives mostly seem to mean is specialized drug treatment courts. Exactly what constitutes a drug court is something to pay attention to. And the US model, now so aggressively pushed as part of US foreign policy, is, at least in my view, not a reform-oriented alternative. It is a way to widen and deepen the control of the criminal justice system over people who use drugs and over health services for them, unless health professionals are integrally involved in final decisions about treatment, which is too often not the case. Low-income people in the US often can't get treatment because there is so little affordable treatment of good quality. And with the growing power of the drug courts, we're moving to a point where low-income people will have to get arrested to get treatment. And that doesn't even begin to say anything about all of the people who are basically coerced into treatment they don't need because of the expansion of the influence of these courts. As the Justice Policy Institute, a US-based NGO, has noted, before the drug courts, people arrested for a minor infraction related to drug use in the US may have been diverted to some kind of community treatment program and had their criminal charge dropped or deferred. But now judges and prosecutors mandate the treatment and the random drug testing that they choose and that they control. In most US drug courts, to speak of some of the really difficult due process questions that are raised by these institutions, people have to actually plead guilty to whatever charge is against them to qualify for treatment as an alternative to punishment. And if they fail treatment, they may wind up thrown back into the regular system with a harsher sentence than if they had started in the adversarial system and had been able to defend themselves. In my home county, which is officially called New York County, maybe known better to some of you as Manhattan, which is certainly one of the most leftist counties of the 3,800 counties in the US, if you have the option in front of you of participating, as they say, in the drug treatment court, you receive a booklet that says that if you are a patient in a methadone program or if you take buprenorphine, and you want to continue in the drug court program as an alternative to incarceration, if that is the case for you, you have 90 days, an arbitrary period not set by health experts but by the prosecutors, to taper off, it's another wonderful phrase, to taper off methadone or buprenorphine. In most US counties, methadone is not even an option for court-mandated treatment in these drug treatment courts. And it's very worrying to me, and also heartbreaking, to hear from our partners in Mexico and in other parts of the world where the US is including strong encouragement to expand drug courts as part of foreign assistance packages, to hear from the Mexicans in particular that there is a new prison industry being built up around the drug courts. Again, this intervention that was meant to be a diversion from incarceration. In the end, the US model of drug courts, at least in most US jurisdictions, does not take us away from the fundamental problem of most drug policies, which is the completely abusive misapplication of criminal law to offenses that simply do not belong in the penal code. Criminal law is an important tool for societies, and most societies agree that it must be reserved for the most heinous and repugnant acts in society. In evidentiary terms, most criminal justice systems recognize that criminal intent needs to be demonstrated for something to be prosecuted under criminal law. I'd like to hear from someone the explanation of where the criminal intent is in drug consumption or minor possession, and where is the evidence that criminal law has had a deterrent effect with respect to minor drug offenses, another condition that we would say is a best practice for appropriate use of the criminal law. So what is extreme and dangerous in all of this is not the legally regulated markets, which, as Ruth Dreyfus said so well this morning, we badly need to add to the body of empirical evidence on drug policy so we can make better decisions. What is extreme and dangerous, as our friend Jindřich Vobořil from the Czech Republic always says, is the very notion that society can be made drug-free by using the law or any other means. That's extreme, and that's dangerous. And what's also extreme and dangerous is the scandalous misuse of criminal law for acts that do not in any way reflect criminal intent or otherwise lend themselves to control through criminal prosecution. And I think that every time the UN or any other entity talks about drug abusers, that phrase that my friend Elliot Albers and his colleagues have worked so hard to get out of the UN vocabulary, I think we should respond by saying that the real abuse in this story is the massive worldwide abuse of criminal law as a social tool in the drug area. I think it was the Nobel laureate physicist Niels Bohr who said that if you have a simple truth, the opposite of that simple truth is a falsehood. But if your truth is a complex and nuanced truth, the opposite of that truth might be another complex and nuanced truth. We who call all the time for evidence-based drug policy, I know, always try to be thoughtful and nuanced. And I think right now our opponents are doing a darn good job of seeming to be dealing in thoughtful and nuanced truths. I actually begin to think, as I think anyway, about this UN special session in 2016, that maybe it is time for us to hammer a little harder at what are the simple truths of drug policy reform. And I mean they're the ones where the opposite of them is a lie. Those truths that motivate us to be part of a global reform movement and to be part of shifting the substance and the language of this debate. Like the truth that any application of criminal law to acts such as drug use and minor possession is an abuse of the criminal law. Like not investing in harm reduction and basic health and social services for people who use drugs is scandalous and unacceptable. Like that any drug law or policy that is applied in any way that is racially or ethnically discriminatory is unacceptable. Like that it doesn't matter if you call it a treatment court, any court that puts decisions about drug-related health services in the hands of prosecutors and judges is not acceptable. And like that any drug policy or law that does not respect and protect the full range of human rights of people who use drugs must be scrapped. We also, I think, have to be careful not to fall into the other trap that the new rhetoric is setting, which is to make cannabis the beginning and the end of the drug policy reform story. Consumption and minor possession of all drugs, have no business being in the penal code. In that regard, let's not lose sight of that truth, of the trees of that truth for being in a forest of weed. Yeah, sorry. Well. Your experiences here in Europe, including those of the country where we are now, are still the best real-life manifestations we have on this planet of these simple truths. Your voice has to be front and center in these upcoming debates. We know that your progressive policies often become political footballs in this complicated moment in the history of Europe. We know that to the degree that migrant populations and people of color are involved in drug consumption or drug markets here, the politics of anything related to the rights of people who use drugs become wicked hard. But I really appeal to you, please help us to conduct this debate in the informed way that it needs to be conducted. Please help us to strengthen our transatlantic advocacy alliances. Help us to continue to learn from your experiences, and let us all learn together to navigate this new chapter in the rhetoric and the reality of the war on drugs. Thanks.